right, good afternoon, everyone. My name is Kayla, and the things that we're going to be covering today are based on sort of the lessons and the things that we've implemented in an effort to serve and expand our enterprise customers. And this is kind of specifically from within the last year and a half. Early last year, we made the decision to kind of split the traditional customer success manager role into two distinct roles. Of course, a commercially focused customer success manager, but also an onboarding and enablement manager. And so at Kodiak, roughly 20% of our customer base fits within the enterprise category, and that accounts for about 43% of our revenue. So in the effort to kind of serve and expand these customers, we picked up on three key things. The first one being that onboarding is truly foundational. We can't just be treating it like a formality. The second one, we have to really understand our goals in order to help our customers achieve them. And last but not least, something that has been spoken about a lot today, we can't forget to be human. So let's dive into the first lesson. Now, I find this to be the case across more frequently than you would imagine. And that's enterprise customers will almost always have more at stake than any of the other customers that we're working with. And if you think about what it takes to get a customer, an enterprise customer, to your kickoff, it takes quite a lot, right? They have to align internally that something needs to change. They have to go through an RFP, sit through demo after demo, sort of convince the skeptics within their business, and then all the stuff with legal and procurement, right? So what feels like day one for CS, by the time the customer reaches us on that first day, they are arriving with an enormous amount of pressure for the decision that they've made. They have colleagues watching on, will this be a success? They have a CFO who has approved a budget. And so it's really critical that our onboarding helps validate the decision that they've made and doesn't just quietly unravel it. So at Kodiak, our enterprise onboarding, so enterprise customers will spend anywhere between 8, 14, and 18 weeks in onboarding. That's quite intentional because we scope our onboarding based on complexity. So not just how much they're paying us, it's based on the number of modules that we're implementing. It's also human-led, so they're working with an onboarding and enablement manager, meeting with them throughout all of those different weeks. And then last but not least, we have our first kind of time to value marker within 14 days. 14 days might sound like a lot, same with 18 weeks, but we're working with enterprise customers, we're delivering enterprise software, and we work within the kind of supplier relationship management and procurement industry. So these are customers with really complex global supply chains, working with critical materials. So being able to screen their suppliers within those first kind of 14 days working with us is, it's incredibly quick. It's also the first time that we're signaling to those customers that they've made the right decision by working with us. And so our onboarding process is pretty typical. I mean, we have a kickoff, we're implementing the solution together, we're doing training and enablement, but there's one thing that we've added in this kind of last year and a half that we think is quite critical, and that's the strategic success alignment meeting. And you'll notice it happens before the kickoff, which is really key. So I'm happy to walk you through it. This meeting is our first chance to align with enterprise customers on what the vision for the onboarding looks like, both onboarding, long-term success. It's also kind of nice to cover off any sort of initial questions ahead of the kickoff. But we work in a board that looks like this in Figma, and we pre-populate it ahead of meeting with the customer. We're taking information we've gathered in the sales to CS handover, as well as anything that we can pick up from the Gong transcripts. And it's really key that it's filled in beforehand. This way, we're not asking the customer to repeat themselves again. We're validating what they've already shared in the sales process and then opening up the conversation to continue expanding on it. We're touching on things like what are the customer's strategic, tactical, operational goals? What are their pain points? But we're also asking questions that maybe aren't very typical and sometimes a little bit uncomfortable. And that's, what are the risks with this project? What might block implementation? We're also aligning on what done looks like in the onboarding, as well as aligning on our governance model. And so in kind of shifting and having this meeting before we've even kicked off the project, we found that it's really allowed us to align on what success looks like in the onboarding as well as the long term. It also gives us a better understanding of what's at stake with this implementation. It creates sort of a foundation that we can always come back to throughout the onboarding with customers. Very helpful when like the scope starts to creep or timelines shift, or all of a sudden we actually need to implement something else, we can return to that board. And because we're starting to have these discussions early on in the customer's life cycle, it makes every conversation about what success looks like going forward much easier. And that leads me to the second lesson. We found that we were doing a really good job of building this kind of layer of this foundation early on, talking about success. But when we were trying to run the QBRs later in the customer journey, they took a long time to prepare for, they weren't necessarily moving things forward, and we stopped. Because we felt like there was a really clear pattern in QBRs, both as a team that has run them, as well as the people on the other end, because we also are sort of on the receiving end from tech providers. And that's that, at least from our experience, the typical QBR has a really similar pattern. It's almost always based on the vendor's agenda, so our agenda towards customers. It's typically reporting on the past. My least favorite thing is reporting on support tickets. Maybe someone recognizes that. It takes a long time to prepare for, and ultimately, hopefully everyone will recognize that sometimes we're just hoping that customers don't cancel this meeting. And so we were laying a really good foundation, like we talked about, of success early on. And so we've shifted to strategic success planning. And so with this, we're aligning on the customer's goals. We're setting sort of what are the next steps on both sides of the table in order to help customers reach their goals. We are creating one shared document, so that's either in Figma or in PowerPoint that both sides have access to. And ultimately, we're discussing their goals. It's their plan, so they're far more invested to join this type of meeting. And so let's take a look at it, because it has been, it can be challenging, if I'm going to be completely honest. So when we first start working with customers, and when we first shifted to this method, when you ask a customer what their strategic goal is, you'll very often get something like this. Now, I've chosen to use a common example for CRM today. And so a customer might say to you that their strategic goal is to get the team using the CRM. They're going to measure this by making sure that they have all of their data in one place, that data is kept up to date, and ultimately the team is trained on this. Now, there's nothing wrong with this answer, but it's not a goal. These are activities, right? And if we're also very honest with ourselves, get the team using the CRM, that's not it. Sort of, if we ask the question, what would you do tomorrow if we asked you for the renewal, they're not going to say yes because they're using the CRM, right? And so by going through this process with our customers, we actually see that there's a lot of challenging that you have to do back and forth. We typically ask the customer, what's driving this investment in the continued usage of our platform? What are you being measured on? What are your KPIs? And so if we dig a bit deeper, we can actually get to this kind of level. It's no longer just get the team using the CRM. We might actually discover that for our customer, their goal is to increase revenue by 15% through the end of the year, and they intend to do so with improved pipeline visibility and faster deal cycles. The interesting thing as well is when you continue to dive deeper, the success criteria become measured and outcome-oriented. We have steps on both sides and really clear ownership of how we're going to help them achieve this. And we can run our kind of meeting cadence with customers around the achieved by dates rather than just on the typical quarterly cadence. Now, this doesn't land in just one meeting with a customer. It can take quite a bit of back and forth, but once we have kind of aligned on this plan, this is how we can continue to build on the foundation of success with our customers. And so shifting from the kind of traditional QBR to strategic success planning with our customers has really allowed us to be able to align on our customers' goals, not just our agenda. It helps us spot risks early. This is a plan we've created together. We've agreed on these success criteria and achieve by dates. So if customers aren't reaching this, it's a really strong indication that something isn't going right, and how can we course correct? And ultimately, it makes expansion kind of a natural part of the conversation. So when we create these success plans, sometimes we might find that in order to reach this particular strategic goal, we actually might need to add a different business unit to the platform as well. Or maybe we have a module that can help them achieve that goal much quicker. And because we're doing this in both the onboarding, in the success alignment, and then doing it later on in the customer journey, we've seen some really interesting results. So as I mentioned, last year was the first year we split out into 2 different teams. And within that first year, we saw that our onboarding enablement team was able to source 10.5% of all the expansion that we closed. We were able to increase our closed won upsales and expansion by 58% last year. And ultimately, our deal size increased as well by 13%. And so these numbers are kind of business or customer-wide. They're not just from our enterprise segment. But that's also very intentional because we work with customers that aren't just enterprise, right? And so what we've seen is when we have customers in our growth segment and we apply these same principles, they move into the enterprise segment. And we've done that and seen that 45% of our enterprise customers today didn't start out that way. They've really grown into it. And last but not least, a lesson that I think we're maybe all still continuing to learn is this idea about trying to automate what scales while protecting what matters. Now, we're not an anti-tech company. We're using AI. But I think we've tried to be really intentional about where we see that technology can support our relationships with customers and where we know it can't replace it. Like many of us in this room, we're using a lot of tools. We've invested quite heavily. We're using things like Gong for conversation intelligence. We have challenged the team to try to use Claude and Lovable to design a digital CSM to help us manage our scaled motion. But yeah, let's be honest, there are some things that we still can't hand over to a tool. We need to do those things ourselves. And so one of those processes is process mapping. So every enterprise customer that works with us, we go through process mapping in the onboarding, long-term success. It's really critical for the strategic success plans that we create. But this is key because we need to really deeply understand how our customers are working today in order to support them and improve their work tomorrow. A really interesting part of this process, we're diving into what are their workflows, what tools are they using, most importantly, where are those processes breaking down? What's interesting in this is we will regularly tell customers through working like this that something doesn't belong in our tool. That process doesn't make sense to have in Kodiak, or this data set, it's not going to bring you anything working with this in our platform. That can be a very tough conversation to take with companies that are paying you over 6 figures, but it's also what builds a lot of trust with our customers. And so what we see is these customers now regularly reach out to our customer success managers because they want a second opinion on how they're working. They want to bounce ideas, get our feedback. And what's really great is our product team often joins these meetings as well, because think about it. It gives them an insight into what are companies what are their pain points? What are they trying to work through? How could we support them? And how can this inform our roadmap? But ultimately, this is just one thing that we're not automating. I touched on, the success alignment meeting early on in the onboarding. That's something that I think would be quite easy to send a questionnaire and ask customers, what are your goals? Why are we working together? But it's not what builds a relationship. And so sort of through these 3 things that we've implemented, there's really one key idea. We're aligning on success early and often, and we're remembering to stay human. And by continuing to take a really hard look at where can we automate and where do we need to be kind of in more constant contact, we see that we have enterprise customers who feel known and not just served by our team. We have a CS team that drives growth and not just retention. Again, that's both in the onboarding team and the customer success managers. And ultimately, we've had 49% growth within our enterprise accounts. And we really attribute that success to these ways of working. 84% of that growth has been CS-led. And so I laughed earlier during the Legora presentation because this is very similar, but it's a conversation we're having internally, and I'm sure a lot of us are. And it's this idea that in a landscape where everyone can build tools, the difference becomes your relationships. I've shared a few of the areas where we feel like it's really important that we can continue to invest our time, our human capital, and I would really encourage you to take a look at your own processes and see where you can do the same. So thank you. That's it for me.
Amazing. We have a few minutes for any questions for Kayla, if there are any questions. Yep, great. Pass it back if that's possible yet. We can pass it back.
So I have a question about that transformation you made in terms of how you qualifying or like how you actually defining the customer goals. Mm-hmm. Maybe you could share a little bit more, like what did you add to your processes or how your team changed working that you managed to, like get those more quantifiable goals defined with customers?
Yes. It was, it's kind of similar to the presentation that Anika gave earlier, but it's kind of all about not accepting the first answer, at least based on our experience. If someone tells you that their goal is X and it's not measurable, we just continue to ask why. And I think a really helpful thing, because it is uncomfortable to continue to press people for that information, but when we ask our customers, at least, what are your metrics for this year? What are you being measured on? They will most of the time be very open to sharing that. And then you can sort of plan out how you can help them achieve that.
Amazing. Thank you so much, Kayla. Another round of applause.